I'd like to say something about Nicholas Johnson before he comes out, kind of recite the titles to you. He's had extensive experience as a professional in terms of, he spent, can you hear me? Excuse me. Testing. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, how about that? Now I can't see anybody at all. Can you hear me now? Okay, Mr. Johnson graduated, if I'm correct, from the University of Texas Law School. He has taught law at Berkeley. He has been a law clerk for Justice Hugo Black, who some consider one of the greatest Supreme Court justices in modern America. He has been on the U.S. Maritime Commission, and he is presently serving as a Federal Communications Commissioner. His term will expire as of 1973. I think he's shown that he's not afraid to speak out, that he's not afraid to talk about the things that are important to people. And so with that, I'll introduce to you Nicholas Johnson.
Thank you very much. They've closed off the highways, the blizzard is coming down, and you've all come through the snow. What have I got to, is this working? This is the problem with the FCC. We don't know anything about communications at all. Can you hear that now? Huh? All right. Well, I said I've come back here to talk to family and friends, and I know I don't have this much family in Ames, so I appreciate very much your coming out. I want to, well, actually, I'm about to make an announcement. A number of people wondering if I'm going to make an announcement. I do have an announcement to make, and the announcement is that I'm planning to speak for only about 30 minutes this evening, and then take questions. And I'd like to kind of share with you the process that I've been through the last few days. It seems like it's been about a month and a half, but my assistants tell me it's only been a week of trying to evaluate, what is it like to decide whether or not you're going to run for the Senate? It's an incredible process, experience. And to talk about that in terms of some of my past experiences in government and kind of where my head's at now with regard to this whole process and what's wrong with government. Frankly, the state of my own mind as of this evening, very candidly, I'm not being coy with you, is that I'm very open. I'm still gathering information. I don't know. A lot of pros, and a lot of people giving me encouragement. I think Senator Miller can be beaten with a vigorous and exciting campaign. Because I think, things should be fun, amongst other things. And life ought to be fun. If it's not, you ought to do something else, and I don't think campaigns ought to be just heavy. I think they've got to, you've got to deal with serious issues. They're there and they have to be dealt with, but I don't think it has to be a drag. So right now I really am just looking at it, and I'm gathering all the information that I can put together, and then at some point, I trust within the next 2 weeks to a month, I'll finally process all these punched cards in my head and make some kind of a decision. So I'm not really here to make a campaign speech, but to rather kind of share with you what I've been doing, and also to hear from you, because that's very important to me. Know what you're thinking about, what your concerns are, what you think the issues ought to be, whether or not you think politics is worthwhile at all, or you've all adopted John Prine's advice in his new song, blow up your TV, throw away your paper, and move to the country. My experience in government started in a sort of peculiar way at the Maritime Administration. Now, I majored in political science. I went to law school. I was teaching administrative law. I'd never heard of the Maritime Administration when the president told me about it. And matter of fact, I really hadn't much heard about the president. I mean, I knew we had one, but people assumed that I was probably a relative, or at least a very close friend of President Johnson's, to appoint a fellow from Iowa whose maritime experience was largely limited to having navigated a canoe on the Iowa River that this was probably nepotism at best. But the fact of the matter is, I didn't know the president or any member of his staff or party campaign contributors or senators or congressmen or whoever those people are you're supposed to know to get those really cushy jobs in Washington. See? And once I got there, I had to kind of find out what it was all about. And what it's about, it turns out, is giving away your money to businessmen who would otherwise, in the great American tradition, go bankrupt. The total subsidy program benefits them to the tune of about $750 million a year. And every independent economist who's ever examined it has concluded that it returns absolutely no economic benefit whatsoever to the American people. An extraordinary program, I thought. And I set about trying to find out what was my responsibility. And I discovered that it is my job as maritime administrator, kind of to hold the spigot down on this pipeline of gold flowing out of Fort Knox, you see. And they try to open it up and get more money, and I try to close it down to, just hold it to $750 million a year. Well, then I kind of wondered, why does a program like this exist? Why is it we give away all these tax dollars? And then, as I came to the FCC, I began to notice a pattern. And it's a pattern that can be characterized as the sub-government. By sub-government, we mean that part of government which is done under a rock. A sub-government, it turns out, because I found that the same thing that happened in maritime also happened over at the FCC. A sub-government, it turns out, springs into existence whenever you have tremendous quantities of economic benefits to bestow, and you have tremendous jurisdiction, discretion, on the part of those who are bestowing them. Now, economic benefits can come in a lot of ways. The most direct, candid method with the least hypocrisy is simply to take tax dollars from the poor and give them to the rich. That's open and above board, like the Maritime Subsidy Program. Other ways are a little more clandestine. Probably the next most direct is giving money to defense contractors, ostensibly in exchange for weapons systems, albeit weapons systems that won't work, that would have been obsolete had they worked, and came in at 300% of what they were projected to cost, but nonetheless some exchange for the dollar, unlike the Maritime Subsidy Program itself. Now, there are other programs that involve stealing from the same people for the benefit of the rich, but taking from them rather in their role as consumers than as taxpayers, because it's easier to hold up a consumer than to hold up a taxpayer, as you all know. For example, I think last year some $7 million was lost as a result of bank robberies from hold-up artists. All the bank robberies in the United States. And yet, a orange juice company, by increasing the amount of water in its orange juice, was able to take an additional $10 million from the American people, more than they would have paid under the old formula of orange juice to water. But you see, we don't talk about that, and yet it seems to me that the criminal party is much more easily identifiable in the case of the orange juice than in the case of the bank robberies, which is really a free enterprise kind of undertaking. When you think about it, anyone can participate who has a gun. You can't do that in the orange juice business. Well, so it is with the oil import quota program, which in this instance comes brought to you by with an imprimatur of the public interest having been placed upon it by the United States government. The rationale is, you see, that in order to serve our national defense interests, we should use up our own oil so as to leave oil reserves in foreign countries where we can get access to it in time of war. In order to effectuate this program, we place restrictions on the amount of foreign oil which may be brought into the United States. Of course, there is a price that we must pay for this because this foreign oil of inferior grade sells for remarkably low prices, and therefore we have to charge the American consumer more for oil and gasoline and other petroleum products. Namely, every time you pull up to the pump in Iowa, you're paying an additional 5 cents a gallon to the American oil companies as you're appreciation for the service that they are providing you, a sum total of some $7 billion a year. Here again, in this case, President Nixon asked for a study of the oil import quota program. To be safe, he selected economists, all of whom had worked for the late President Eisenhower. They came in with a report, nonetheless, recommending that the oil import quota program be abolished because there was no particular benefit to anyone save the oil companies. The report has been shelved. Another way in which you can create money for the rich with the use of government is by the creation of monopoly privileges, such as the creation of a television station out of nothing. I mean, $200,000 worth of studio suddenly becomes a $20 million property because somebody gives you a television license. Another way is by restricting entry. Look at, for example, what the Civil Aeronautics Board is doing for you. If you fly between New York and Washington, an interstate route where you have the protection of the CAB, they examine the rates, and they see to it that you only pay 11 cents per mile to fly from New York to Washington. If, however, you're within the state of California flying on a similar route between Los Angeles and San Francisco, an intrastate route where the CAB cannot provide you that kind of protection, instead of paying 11 cents a mile, you pay 4 cents a mile. That's an example, just one example, of the kind of thing your federal government is doing for you. All right, now, it seemed to me more and more like the maritime program, the more I got into it. And as I looked around, I found the following common themes that run throughout all these agencies. First of all, in most of these industries, there are generally 2 or 3 or 4 leading companies. In the case of broadcast, I'll use broadcasting now rather than oil or cotton or any one of these other areas you could use. In the case of broadcasting, it would be the 3 networks. Amongst these companies, there is generally an industry spokesman who is more highly thought of than the others, hopefully one who's been to college. In the case of broadcasting, they have in fact a PhD, Dr. Stanton, who is wheeled out for all prestigious occasions to speak on behalf of the industry. This is a pattern that's followed in most of the oligopolistic industries, which in fact accounts for most of the industries that amount to anything in the United States. There is some spokesman. Then you create a trade association. Now the purpose of the trade association is to do the bidding of those large companies in those areas that are really so dirty and underhanded that even the companies themselves would rather not be associated with it publicly. And for this purpose, they have created something called the National Association of Broadcasters. In addition to the trade organization, there will be a trade press. Now, the purpose, the trade press and trade organization business in Washington is in fact itself something of an industry, a multi-million-dollar industry, the purpose of which is to keep American businessmen frightened. As the late Speaker Sam Rayburn used to say, there's no one in America more frightened than the American businessman, and if he can't keep himself frightened, he'll go out and hire somebody to keep him frightened. Even though he knows he can wake up in the morning and he won't have had his property confiscated out from under his pillow, he'd still kind of like to believe that it might happen to him. I mean, why else in Broadcasting Magazine is a radio station in Miami, say, taking out a full-page ad to reach a television station in Minneapolis? I mean, did you ever think about that? You see, what's going on? Well, what they're being told is, unless you take out full-page ads in our magazine, unless you contribute fighting funds to our trade organization in Washington, see, your industry may be socialized, may go out of business. You may even have to endure competition. And so that's the principal thrust of the trade organizations and the trade magazines. Then there is generally a subdivision of the Washington Bar, which is made up of those lawyers who practice only before, in this case, the Federal Communications Commission. They are called, in this case, the Federal Communications Bar Association. And they've put a great many of their children through college as a result of procedures which we have designed at the FCC to make things sufficiently complicated that no one who owns a station can actually represent himself before the agency. Then there will be the agency itself, or a bureau within it, in this case, the Broadcast Bureau of the Federal Communications Commission. And there is the source of the power. As with most agencies, the power does not lie with the presidential appointees, but rather with the senior civil servants, the GS 16, 17, and 18s, who've been there generally 20 to 40 years, and who stay long after the presidential appointees have gone. In this case, the chief of the Broadcast Bureau. Then there's generally some supporting staff up on the Hill. This can take the form, actually, of a senator or congressman. Generally, they're too busy with other things, and the task is delegated to a staff member who attains the kind of power that, in the case of the gentleman in the Senate, Nicholas Zappel, is often characterized as the 8th commissioner of the FCC. He speaks for the United States Senate on matters having to do with communications policy. Now, the point is that you don't read much about this process in the newspapers or see much about it on television. And in schools, you learn about the 3 equal branches of government and how we have courts and the president and the executive branch and the cabinet. And you may hear about the regulatory commissions, the so-called headless 4th branch of government. And you have to really have worked within one to know why they call it headless. But let me tell you. You see, but in fact, I don't know if you know this about the budget, but you know we've got about a $200 billion budget, right? I mean, you know that. Okay, well, let me give you these figures. Suppose you take all the costs associated with running the United States Congress, the salaries of the congressmen and senators and their staffs and the junkets and the printing of the congressional record and the reports and Rayburn House office building, all that, okay? You put that, total all that, you put that up there in one line. And then you take all the costs of the judicial branch, the judges and their clerks and the courthouses and the printing of their opinions, and we'll throw in the district attorneys, and we'll throw in the whole Justice Department if you want to. Total all that, put that on a second line. And then you take all the regulatory commissions, you total all their budgets, put that on a third line, and then take the employees of the civil servants in Washington, D.C., with the exclusion, say, of 3 or 4 of the departments with the most number of employees, the Pentagon and the post office, so forth. Total all their salaries, put that on a fourth line. You total all those 4 lines. Guess what percentage that is of the federal budget? And we're talking about the government, okay? I mean, what percentage of the federal budget do we spend on the government? Guess from anybody? 5%. Anyone else? 2, 1. Well, I kind of gave it away. Sometimes I get guesses as high as 30%. In any event, the answer, and you're much smarter than other audiences, the answer is, in fact, 1/2 of 1%. I mean, you could become an anarchist and wipe out the whole thing, which I sometimes think would not be a bad idea, but it wouldn't save you any money. I mean, you still pay the taxes on April 15th. You see? Now, that's what we've got to get a hold of. And that is done through this process of the sub-government, a process over which really no president has much control. No senator has much control. I mean, anybody who comes through Iowa campaigning for United States Senate and says he's going to cut back on maritime subsidies, well, marvelous. Okay, now tell me how you're going to do it. All right? See, you're right on the issues. You're right on the issues. Now tell me how you're going to do it. Okay. Now, let me talk for a moment about another little thing I discovered at the FCC. Because I kind of go through life, so I know Margaret Mead was here last night. Well, I kind of go through life as an anthropologist or a novelist. I mean, you got to do something to keep your sense of perspective and sense of humor about it all. And you go nuts in an agency like the FCC if you took it seriously. And I keep a journal, and you kind of keep track of all this stuff. I mean, the last few days have been fantastic. I mean, we've already written a novel. And so you kind of watch what's going on around you, and you kind of try to be reflective about it. Sometimes that takes the form of little songs or poetry or whatnot. Other times you write articles or short stories or whatever, to kind of deal with this incredible thing called reality. And so I've started observing more and more about this whole mass communications thing that I'm supposed to be regulating. And how does that tie into this whole process? What is the role of ignorance in public policy, in politics, in government? I'm very serious. Because just as information is power, so is it a power to be able to keep people ignorant. All right? That's pretty heavy. Think about that. All right, now, let me give you some examples. Let's start with the most above-board kind of declaration of purpose on the part of a broadcaster, because I admire an absence of hypocrisy. And this is a story that involves a friend of mine, a black disc jockey, who went on to become the head of their national organization. But this is the first job he ever held down in South Carolina, I think it was. He walked into a radio station, and the station manager just handed him a stack of 40 records. Said, "Here, boy, go play these." And he looked at the records, and he looked around the station. There wasn't any news wire there. There wasn't even a newspaper in there anywhere. They could just read on the air, like I understand some stations around here do. And he said, "Well, look, I don't mind playing the records, but, do you mind if, occasionally I put a little news out on the station?" And the station manager turned to him and he says, "Look, boy," he says, "you're not going to educate the niggers of this community at my expense." See? Now, I admire a man like that because he puts it right up front, see, where you know right off where you stand. The thing that bothers me are the network vice presidents, you see, who either don't know what they're doing, which is conceivable because they're not really that bright, or, they're really engaged in a very venal thing. Let me tell you another story. I went before the Violence Commission and to testify, and the networks had just been attacking the Violence Commission because they said it was violating the First Amendment. I mean, the fact that it existed was violating the First Amendment because it was making the networks talk about the role of violence on television and violence in our society, and that was a violation of the First Amendment and it was censoring them. And I said, "Look, when they lay that complaint on you, you tell them this story." And I told them the story of a friend of mine who had put together a program about black lung disease. Now, if you don't know about black lung disease, it's what you get if you go down into a coal mine and you breathe coal dust. And your lungs disintegrate because your lungs not supposed to have coal dust in them. And the air comes out of your lungs or something like that. I don't have it exactly right, but you don't get as much oxygen as you need, and you get very weak. And about the time you're 45, you're out of work because you can't even climb up and out of the coal mine anymore. And so you stop working, but there isn't any workman's compensation for you, and you don't even know what's wrong with you. All you know is you're getting awful tired, all right? Now, he did this little program about it. It wasn't any radical thing. This guy's a doctor. And it was a well-produced program, good program. But I mean, it wasn't any Saul Alinsky job or anything, all right? So he goes to all the stations in the state, and they won't run his program. They won't run it. A station outside of the state carries it, and a cable television system in the state that is required by law to carry all the programming of that station just goes dark during the time this little half-hour show is on about black lung disease. So I told Violence Commission, I said, when they talk to you about censorship, you just encourage them. You say, all right, we'd like to talk about censorship. Let's talk about censorship on television, what the real problem is, okay? Well, about 2 weeks after that testimony, NBC went down there and started taking some pictures of black lung. I don't know why they chose that particular time in history to do it, but they did. And of course, the station owners who just plug the thing into the wall in the morning and take everything off the network and then pick up the money in the afternoon and carry it to the bank, they don't watch the stuff from the networks, and so they just came tumbling out of those picture tubes right there into West Virginia, all that stuff about black lung. And those fellows got home at night, and their wives said to them, "Hey, honey, I heard something on television today about something called black lung disease, and maybe that's why you're so tired." And the more they started talking about it, and the more they found out about it, the madder they got, as well they might. And about 2 weeks after that, they all climbed out of the mines, 35,000 of them, without much in the way of organization. And they all marched on the state capitol in West Virginia. And about 2 weeks after that, they got the first piece of black lung legislation ever in the history of the state, workman's compensation legislation. Now, what's the point of that story? The point of that story is if you give people information, they'll act. I mean, they weren't politically sophisticated. They were just mad. And if you tell people about what's going on in their society, they get awful mad. And they do something to change it. But look at your prime time schedules for television in this part of Iowa tonight. That's when the people of the state are watching TV. Let's not worry about that occasional documentary gets on or what was on the evening news. Let's look at what's on during the time people are watching. And ask yourself, what's going into the heads of the people who live in the state of Iowa? Now, you fill up people's minds full of cotton candy. They get toothache. They don't feel very good. And they don't think very much. And they don't act very much. And you don't have as much trouble at the state legislature and city council and your congressmen and senators and the big corporations outside of Iowa that control the state. They don't have as much trouble as if you tell the people what was going on. That's not an accidental policy. Well, that kind of came home to me. And then I had a little experience of my own along that line recently. I've had a number of them, but I'll just tell you one because I'm trying to hold down the time on this. Last time I was on Merv Griffin's show. I was on, who else was on that night? Peter Fonda and Mort Saul and Michael Crichton, that fellow that wrote Andromeda Strain. And Merv started off with one of his usual intellectual questions, something like, what's wrong with the world, you know? And so Peter and Mort kicked it around for a while, and finally it came my turn, and I said, well, I'll tell you, Merv, I'll tell you what I think's wrong. He says, what's that? I said, I think it's those two commercials you just had on. The first one was a Bayer aspirin commercial. And I said, you realize, I mean, you all claim to be concerned about the drug problem. I said, you know, the major pusher in America is television. I said, from morning till night, what's it saying? It's saying, you know, better living through chemistry. It's not just DuPont's slogan. You know, we got aspirin, we got stomach settlers, we got gentle blue pill, Compose, we got tranquilizers, pep me up, sleeping pills. Anything you want, any problem you got, there's a little chemical, take your problem away. And I said, you know, an aspirin is not just an advertisement for aspirin, it's advertisement for, you know, and there are other ways of dealing with headaches. I mean, if you got there's a natural solution to every problem, you know, and there's a corporate solution. Somebody trying to make a profit off of you, doing it their way. But there's a natural way. You got a headache, you lie down, somebody massages the back of your neck. Very nice. And it's a lot cheaper, and it's better for your body. And your headache goes away faster. All right? But you never hear about that on TV. All you hear about is aspirins, see? And then that, in turn, is an advertisement for kind of all headache remedies. And then that, in turn, is kind of an advertisement for all chemical solutions to the problem. And I said, that next commercial you did, that was for paper towels. I said, you believe in ecology, don't you? Oh, yeah, he says. I said, would you ever stop think about, you know, folks that use cloth rags to wipe stuff up with and then just wash those down every once in a while. You wouldn't need to be chopping down all those trees to turn them into paper towels to wipe up the same stuff to throw in a wastebasket. It has to burn, and then the smoke, you know, pollutes too. So you just use those rags. And I said, and furthermore, because he had the most elaborate darn way of putting on this commercial. I mean, they wheeled out the big old countertop thing, and it had a sizzling skillet of bacon there, and a sort of electric fry pan, see? And I said that commercial illustrates the proposition that every commercial is a commercial for all products. That every commercial is a commercial for the conspicuous consumption style of life, for materialism, for doing it the corporate way instead of your own way. I said, you know, you don't have to use electric fry skillet. I said, what is that, a battery-operated one? It says it didn't have a cord on it or anything. I mean, it's just sizzling out there all by itself. I said, you don't need a battery-operated skillet. You know, you can just put it on a stove. And furthermore, I said, if you're really concerned about the health of the American people, you know, a major cause of death for men over 45 is heart attacks, and cholesterol has a little something to do with that. And you're out there, you know, pitching a pretty cholesterol-heavy product there. And then I got into this thing about the fry pan and every commercial for all products. And I said, like, take that. Have you ever seen a Lemon Pledge commercial? A lady comes waltzing out in a little aerosol can of wax, and she sprays it around, you know, careful not to get any on her. And, well, now there are a lot of things you can say about that commercial. I mean, for starters, you know, anything in an aerosol can is going to have little particles that are going to get into your lungs and be bad for you. Secondly, the contents of the package are going to cost you about 10 times what they'd cost if you'd buy them straight. Thirdly, aerosol cans explode when you put them in incinerators. I mean, it's a bad thing from start to finish, okay? Put all that aside. That's not really what I'm talking about. It's kind of introduction. Look at what else she's selling. She's selling the wig, the hairspray, the cosmetics, the gown, the thick carpet, the sofa and stuff in the living room with her, the drapes, as well as that spray can. She's saying that's the way you ought to live. if you want to be like those great people on television, see, you can't tell the difference between commercials and programs. As soon as that commercial's over, you switch to the same kind of living room scene, don't you? Did you ever think about that? That's no accident. I was on a talk show one night, I guess it's Steve Allen's show, and some woman was on there, I don't remember her name, you'd remember it if I could think of it. She's a movie actress. In any event, during a break, I tried to get her to tell it on when the camera was on, but we were just talking during a commercial. She said she was doing a show once, and the whole thing built up, so she was supposed to be this rich woman, and she really didn't have any money, and then finally the guy discovers she doesn't have any money. And so the whole play builds up this great climax. She comes out with this line. She says, "You don't understand. I don't own a thing." See? All right. Anyway, that's a line. Okay. At that point, the advertising agency vice president comes rushing out on the set. So, "You can't say that. You can't say that." She, "What are you talking about? Why can't I say that? We're trying to sell things. You can't tell people you don't own anything." She couldn't believe it. But he's very serious. So she says, "All right, what's the alternative line you suggest?" So they went off in conference, and they came back, and they said, "What you're supposed to say is, everything I own is rented." Because that would at least have the support of Hertz and Avis and those guys, you see? Well, look, who sold the most cigarettes? Dean Martin, who comes ambling out on stage smoking one, or the Marlboro man on his horse? See, it's all part of the same thing. See? Well, so we talked about all this on the show. At the end of the show, Merv says, "Well, you fellows have said some critical things tonight, but at least we got to give CBS a big hand, right?" Well, no one really thought much of applauding, except for the fact that these enormous signs go on, say, "Applaud, applaud." So they all applaud. That's the end of the show. Cut, credits, out. Okay. Well, if you watched the show, you saw CBS getting the big hand. Although ask yourself, why should a broadcaster get a big hand for putting ideas out to people? I mean, presumably that's his job, isn't it? All right. Anyway, you see CBS get this big hand. But what you don't see is how the
problems that creates forces in society and trying to deal with some of these issues. When you can't even get them out on the tube, you can't even get them discussed.
people don't know about the sub-government process. Even the candidates don't know about the sub-government process, really. I spent, the last 2 or 3 weeks have just been a disaster area. I don't remember when this was, but it was within the last month at least. I spent a week taping about 25 hours of television programs as moderator on a show with all the presidential candidates and some other senators and congressmen. And by the end of it, I was really bleary. But as this thing went on, there were 3 or 4 student panelists and me asking questions. And we kind of asked issue-type questions, like how do you feel about the war, and what about busing, and how are you on amnesty, and And after, partly I guess it just got boring. But also as it went on, I began to kind of wonder to myself, why is it that this is the level on which we're conducting this dialogue? Because it really doesn't make any difference how these guys stand. And furthermore, you cannot pin down a politician by asking him a question on an issue. I mean, this is not a campaign speech this evening, but I mean, Senator Miller is a good example of a guy who has, voted every way on virtually every issue. Whatever your position is, he can satisfy you that he's taken that position. And he's right. He has taken that position. He either, he voted for the bill, but he introduced an amendment trying to change it, or he voted against the bill because he introduced an amendment to try to do something else, or he made a speech on some other kind of point, see? I mean, you cannot nail down a guy by asking him questions like that. And somebody like Scoop Jackson was on, I remember. We asked him, I got thinking later, he's been answering these questions for 30 years. And if he hasn't learned by now how to answer questions, he's a professional question answerer. And he's going to answer them in the best possible way for the audience that he's dealing with. So there's no way you can nail him down on an issue. So then I got thinking about, what really is relevant? And it seems to me that what's most relevant is process. What are you going to do about the system to make it work better? What are you going to do to make it work better? Here you've got, Senator Miller very proudly votes against Butts. Well, where is Senator Miller when Butts is being considered? I mean, he's supposed to be the ranking minority member on the Agriculture Committee. Who do you turn to if you're the President of the United States and a Republican? Except to the ranking Republican on the Agriculture Committee. How does Butz get nominated in the first place? I mean, if you want to take that issue, take any other issue. And like McGovern, even, I asked him, I said, you know, I don't even remember what the issue was now. And I said, what are you going to do about these problems? He said, well, we're going to appoint good men to office. Well, you know, that's just not the answer. Because you can put good men in office, and you've still got the sub-government phenomenon, and you still don't have the mass media saying anything about it, and you've still got the people ignorant about it, and you still don't have any citizen representation in the process, and you still don't have any check against big corporate power. What do you do if you're president? Like Nixon, and Harold Janine of ITT comes to you, and I don't know if you know it, but I mean, ITT owns Avis, ITT owns Continental Baking, ITT owns Sheraton Hotels, ITT would have owned ABC Television, but for the fact that we wrote some dissenting opinions. And Harold Janine comes to you and says, tell you what, need a little extra housing out in San Diego? I'll build you a Sheraton Hotel. And then mysteriously the next week, a bunch of antitrust cases are dropped. Now, you know, what do you do if you're president in that situation, if you're George McGovern, and you need a hotel in San Diego? What do you do if you're running for president and you need $30 million to run or whatever, and the oil companies come in and say, look, you know, here's the money on the barrelhead, but don't be tampering around with our oil depletion allowance? What do you do? What do you do when the maritime industry comes in and says, in exchange for the $750 million you're giving us, we'd be happy to give you a little in return? You cut the maritime subsidies? I mean, those are the questions. What do you do at the FCC when ATT comes in there? They got an army to walk around through our halls all the time, take folks to lunch, treat them kind, install their telephones, stuff like that. Take the commissioners out, ex-party them on the issues, on the cases. Okay, what are you going to do about that? What difference does it make who's in the White House, how AT&T is going to work the FCC? It's going to be the same old sub-government as always was. I mean, it seems to me that's the problem, not where you stand on the issues. The problem is that the process is wrong. What can you do about it? A lot of things you can do about it. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't think we've discussed the problem thoroughly. I'm not sure I've even identified it properly yet. I mean, we've got to play around with what are the right questions before we can worry about the right answers. But I'll tell you one thing that helps, and that is if you can get some outside participation, something like the kind of thing Ralph Nader is doing. At the FCC, there is a single guy who's called the Citizens Communications Center. And he decided to set up this thing, see? He's turned the agency upside down. He's in there in 25 different cases. Just one young lawyer. Any one of you can do it here in the state. You know, go after a local city council or, you know, one summer when I was in junior high school, I read Lincoln Steffens' autobiography. I was working down at the Light and Power in the evening as a janitor, and I also had to be night watchman. That gave me a lot of time to read. And so I read this book, Lincoln Steffens' autobiography. Well, Lincoln Steffens was a muckraker. He was sort of a Ralph Nader around the turn of the century, but he didn't introduce legislation and file lawsuits. He just wrote the articles for the New Republic, so to speak. But he threw out this challenge. He said, I'll come into your town and prove it's corrupt. I don't care where you are, what it is. You know, give me 2 weeks, I'll prove it's corrupt. And I was just fascinated by that idea. And so I decided in junior high I'd set out, little old Iowa City. And you know, I mean, there it is, nice little river town and upstanding university folk. And I felt, by golly, you know, I'm going to prove Lincoln Steffens wrong. So I started sniffing around. Well, by the end of 3 days, I found out how the parking meter contract was awarded in town and who had been selling the trucks to the city councilman. And then I happened upon the fact that the city's swimming pool was going to be put out on some plot of land outside of town that one of the city councilmen owned instead of in a city park. So I found out enough about local government to find out that we had a ward system then, and this guy was elected from a particular part of town. So I went with one little friend of mine, and we just went around. We knocked on all the doors in his ward, and we got all his folks to sign a petition saying they wanted a swimming pool in the city park. And we went into city council one night, and we just made a little speech, and we just presented him that little petition. At the time, as it happened, the same doctor who later advised me I had to go to Southwest to go to school because of my hearing loss and sinus trouble, at that time told me I couldn't swim. So it was a little bit of a fraud, but it was in the public interest. And the swimming pool is now in the city park, and you can go swim there in it if you want to. The point is, you can do these things. And it kind of anywhere you turn, it's wrong. You just have to get in there and dig around and find out what it is. I know in Washington, I mean, you can walk into any federal agency and go down any hall, walk into any door, stop at any desk, and ask that person, what do you do here? And you're off and running. Well, that's the background odyssey that now brings me to the state of Iowa. And when Johnny Culver got out of this race, folks started calling me and saying, you know, come on out here and run for Senate. Well, I don't do anything very lightly, and I go about this and trying to make this decision the same way I go about making a decision about what kind of domestic satellite system our country ought to have. Try to get all the facts and all the information I need to decide it intelligently, and then ultimately sort it all out and decide it. And at this point, I haven't done that yet. But central to my decision are the kinds of things we've been talking about tonight. Now, how can you be most effective in this society? Is there any point in being in the United States Senate? Is there anything I can do there that I can't do as a minority member of the FCC? I mean, at least there I only get outvoted 6-1. In the Senate, I'd get outvoted 99-1. You know, I think Ralph Nader is probably more effective than at least 85 of the United States senators out of 100. And that's being very generous to the United States Senate. He has certainly introduced and passed more legislation, major legislation, than any other senator. Why should Ralph Nader be in the United States Senate? People want him to run for president. He doesn't want to run for president. For one thing, it kind of limits your credibility. If people are saying, no, I mean, they say, look, you know, he's doing it. People are doing something because they want to get rich, or they're doing something because they want to, you know, they want to get elected to office or reelected or whatnot. It just makes you less effective in what you're doing. And you got to think of what you're all about. You know, what's inside your head, and to what extent can you go on keeping the kind of soul you've been trying to develop and the individuality that you've got, and that kind of a process. I'm coming more and more to the position that the race is very much doable. I mean, I think Jack Miller can be beat with an exciting campaign. I think a sufficient amount of money is available. I think potentially the organization is there if it'll swing into place and get behind a single guy and push him. But that's not necessarily the answer, so far as I'm concerned. It does not automatically follow that if someone would appoint me to the United States Senate, that I would necessarily accept the appointment. And that's the kind of thing that I'm wrestling with as I go about this process of trying to figure out this very practical side of what politics is all about. I write and I talk about the influence of money in politics, but boy, I'll tell you, it's something to get out and really track down that money. Who do you go to? What process do you go through? Everybody outside of the state says Miller's going to spend $1 million here, and it takes $1 million to run in a state like Iowa. People inside the state, not accustomed to the knowledge of the fact that it takes $1 million to run in Iowa, talk in terms more of $500,000. Okay, suppose you were running. Where do you get $500,000? Where do you get $1 million? How do you do it? Or do you do it without any money? What happens if what happens if the media cuts you out entirely? That's the only way you can talk to people, you know. Just do that little eye. You run again. I mean, you walk across the state talking to them one at a time while the other guy is buying that thousands of dollars worth of stuff on a television tube with professional advertising agencies and production techniques. And this is what happens to the process. The same big money that controls the FCC is involved in the United States House and Senate. The same kind of problem. And it gets back to this kind of process question. See, my philosophies are really, I get dubbed with some incredible labels sometimes. I once gave a speech called Why I Am a Conservative, or For Whom Does Bell Toil, in which I discussed about 18 case studies of instances in which telephone company management had taken positions that simultaneously cost consumers more and robbed shareholders of dividends. See, I finally realized there's no point talking about the public interest. That's not going to turn anybody on. But you start pointing out how American corporations are not even serving the interests of their own shareholders, and then they have to, then they have to respond to you in some way. Well, listen, I want to get your questions. I've talked much longer than I intended to. I did just, kind of want to share with you my present state of mind, let you participate in this process. Tell me what's on your mind. What do you think the issues are? What are the questions you want to ask on any of the stuff I've talked about or anything else the FCC is involved in that you're interested in? Yes?
What do you know about agriculture and farming?
Well, let me tell you about that. I know a little bit more about it than I knew about the maritime industry from my canoe experience. I had a grandfather in the farming business in northwest Iowa. Still got family up there. Mother has a farm up there. Aside from that, have very little experience beyond what I had as a boy. Never worked for the Department of Agriculture. Haven't taught, the kind of law I've taught has not involved agricultural policy. But there again, let me put the question back to you. Do you really want to know my kind of cocktail party off the top of the head snap judgment opinions about agricultural policy questions? Or should you really be asking me, how would you go about informing yourself about agricultural policy? Would you read the newspaper and vote according to what you read there? Would you come here and ask faculty members to form some kind of a council, and you come here and kind of take a seminar from them and get briefed? Do you want me to do what the Farm Bureau says? Do you want me to sample? You want me to have a poll in Iowa and do what comes out as a result of that poll? That's the question you ought to be asking me, I think, rather than, how do I stand on this piece of legislation or that piece of legislation or whatnot. I can campaign that way. I'm a, fairly quick study. I mean, I went into maritime and knocked off a couple weeks and read some books and knew enough about maritime to deal with it. I can do that with agriculture. But is that what you really want? I mean, you want me to be able to give, quick, snappy, scintillating answers on television? And have some really, well-produced spots on a Hollywood or New York? We can do that if you want, where I stand on this agricultural issue and that. But I think the process question is really more important. It's how am I going to go about getting informed and what is going to be relevant to me and how I vote. Isn't that what you want to know? I think. Yes?
All right, how?
What process would I use? Well, that's what I'd like to discuss with you. I will answer it. Okay. I mean, again, it seems to me that even with regard to the process question itself, I have told you some things that I might do, and I'll be happy to tell you some more. But wouldn't you also like to be involved in the process of process? Don't you think that the people who are being represented ought to have some role to play in deciding how their representative is going to go about the process of taking positions and voting on them? I think polls are useful. I mean, now to address your question, I'm not trying to dodge it. I'm just saying it seems to me you all ought to have an input into the answering of that question too. But now I'll give you my cocktail party off the top of my head reaction, which is what you're asking for. I think polls are useful. I think getting the best advice from the academic community in Iowa that's available is useful. I believe personally, something I do, is I go to individuals as well as through institutions, and almost at random. And when I find a correlation between what some guy tells me when I climb over his fence and go to talk to him on his tractor, and I find he's telling me the same thing that the Farm Bureau or the NFO or the union or some professor here is telling me, and he gives it in a little more graphic slant, a little different way of talking about it, but he's basically saying the same thing. And then I read an article in some journal that takes the same position. And then I'm beginning to get a sense of what probably makes sense. Now that is in fact what I do now. It's a kind of a composite process. I read a lot because I can read faster than I can listen, about 10 times faster than I can listen. And I try to process through my head as much information as I can, as fast as I can. But I also believe in talking to, you have to talk, I think, to institutional leaders, to sort of, quote, recognized authorities, unquote, in our society because we're really hung up with labels, which is one reason why either the FCC position or the Senate position is necessary in order for me to kind of to exist in our society and do what I do. If I was freelance writer Nicholas Johnson, the Saturday Review wouldn't have taken or asked for the last article which I sent to them today by remote control from Iowa. They wouldn't have cared about it. Freelance writer, you have a hell of a time getting that position. The FCC commissioner, they really want an article from me. Now, why? That's kind of dumb. Why do they care about that? Or senator, if you're senator, then, people want to know what you have to say. I don't think that's right. I think everybody's got an equal, I know a lot more intelligence in people than we give them credit for. If you really talk to them, pull them out, and listen to them, and are not turned off by how much erudition and education people have, and try to sift through what they're saying and get to the core of it, I think you can learn from everybody. So that's what I do. Sometimes I schedule little luncheons or put together a panel or something to sit around and talk with the best experts I can find for an hour or two and test ideas with them. But I test one against another. I don't go to any single source, is generally what I now do as a practical matter. Now, from you, please, does that kind of approach make sense to you? Yeah. I mean, is there a point, one of the big questions is, we can now, or we will be able to with cable television, poll people directly. I mean, you can put a television program on the air and immediately by two-way cable get back a yes or no vote on lots of different issues. Now, one of the basic questions in representative democracy is the guy who's in there really supposed to be representing exactly what the people that he's representing would do if they were informed on it? Or are they saying, look, we don't want to get into all these issues. I was in the Iowa legislature today. I don't know that it would be useful if you could do it for those proceedings to be televised live throughout Iowa and require every Iowa citizen to sit in front of his cable television channel listening to that debate and voting on those issues. No question about the fact that it would be more representative in the sense of representative democracy than what we've got now, much more representative. But look, I mean, who's going to pick the corn and do all the other things that have to be done in the state if everybody's sitting there watching television and voting on all that stuff before the legislature? That's the other side of the thing. How much representation do you want? There's got to be a balance. How many issues per year are you personally prepared to be polled on and vote on? How much time are you prepared to give to it? How much time should we insist that you give to it before you vote? Is it enough that you read a paragraph on an issue and then make your mind up and vote on it? Or do you want a guy who spent more time? Or since the guy you've elected isn't going to spend more time anyway, does it really make any difference if you don't do the same thing he did? And how do you, basically the problem though, I mean up there, I went by and I met today the telephone company representative, all right? He's there. He's there full time. And he's paid well to be there full time. He probably paid about as much as the entire House of Representatives to the legislature. All right? Now, were you there? No. Was anybody there on your behalf? No. See, that's what we're talking about. One of you sitting out there this evening could have been there. You could take on, as your responsibility, lobbying for the public interest in Iowa with regard to telephone matters. And you would have an effect. And after the first week, and you'd read a little bit about it, you'd have even more effect. But just being there, you'd have an effect. First thing you'd notice is that guy is sitting there. And you'd say something about it publicly, probably, just like I just did. And the next thing you'd do is you'd start asking questions about what's he do up there? And then you'd say something publicly about that. And then you'd find out which bills he's interested in. And you'd inform yourself about those. And you'd be outraged. And you'd go tell your friends about it. And like those coal miners, they'd come out of the ground and march on the legislature. And it wouldn't do it. And someone other of you can be working on a zoning board. And somebody else can be at the county board of supervisors or whatever, watching over them. See, that's what Ralph's trying to preach and what I'm trying to preach. And when I say preach, it does come as close to religion as it does to politics. Because really what we're talking about is more morality than it is law. And that is that, you know, you shouldn't be sitting down there and me standing up here. You shouldn't be electing a representatives and senators and stuff. It's with you. It's with you. And it's how you lead your life. You vote when you put a dime in a Coke machine instead of drinking a glass of milk. You vote when you use toothpaste instead of bicarbonate of soda. You vote when you get in your car rather than walking or taking a bicycle. You vote by how honest you are in your human dealings with your fellows. See, every hour, every day, you are shaping the kind of a society that this is by what you walk by and you fail to do, and by what you say, I will do. You can't do it all. I can't do it all. Just do a little bit, but you do it all the time. When you're talking with your friends, when you're buying products, think about what you're wearing and why you're wearing it. Think about what you're eating and why you're eating it. Look through your closets and your bathroom cupboards and stuff, and ask yourself with each jar and can and aerosol and so forth, why did I buy that? Do I really want that in my life? Does that piece of corporate junk make my life better or worse? And whose sense of values have I adopted and put on that leads me to make these decisions? Are they my decisions? And you put all that together, you're going to be involved in politics too, but not politics exclusively, because it all goes together. And you find that the kind of natural lifestyle that I'm talking about makes a lot of things suddenly all fit together. Because what feels best for you in terms of hedonism, what makes you happiest, what makes you feel best, is also the most economical way to do it. It's the most ecologically sound way to do it. It's the way that's going to contribute to your mental health rather than your mental illness. It's the way that's going to contribute to your physical health. And it's the way that's most consistent with the basic tenets of all the world's great religions. And that's just about exactly the opposite way of what they're telling you to do on television. And that's where it all comes back full circle. But if you figure out where you're really at, what you want to do with your life, and put it together your way instead of their way, you can do that too, because that is a choice you have. Yes?
How do you view the future of cable television based on the new body of rules issued February 3rd? I mean, what will happen in the next 10 years based on that?
Well, there's a prime example of the process I'm talking about. We worked out a cable television policy. On August 5th, 1971, we sent that cable television policy to the United States Senate and House. We said we were going to adopt it. After August 5th, the most powerful elements in this industry, the richest broadcasters, not the small stations in the small towns, but the wealthiest stations in the biggest cities, and their representative, and the representative of the cable television people, and the representative of the richest program owners, put pressure on the White House, to which the White House is seated, and President Nixon's representative sat down with those three businessmen, and with Dean Birch of the FCC present, without his telling the other commissioners that he was doing it, and they just simply wrote their own cable television policy, one that would better take care of their political power and their economic interests. And Dean Birch then brought the policy back to the FCC and said, here, swallow. And a majority swallowed. And that is now your cable television policy, brought to you by ABC, CBS, and NBC television. That's what I'm talking about in process, see? It doesn't really make any difference. You ask Dean Birch on August 1, how do you stand on this issue, Dean Birch? He'll tell you how he stands on the issue. But then he'd go over to the White House and participate in the meeting and come back and say, this is the political reality, I have to do this. That's what's wrong. So cable television basically will not exist in the largest 50 markets where the people are, because the big broadcasters don't want it there. Iowa, that's just, boondocks as far as they're concerned. They confuse it with Idaho and Ohio all the time. They don't care. I mean, you want cable out here, you can have it. They'll give you that. But they're not going to put it in those markets where they get 80% of their revenue. Those are keeping for themselves. Yes?
Do you feel that you can win the majority of the conservative farmers vote?
I would hope so.
How do you plan to do that?
By talking to them the way I've talked to you. Because I think that the kind of thing we're talking about here tonight, which is the lack of control that we have over our own lives because of external institutional forces that are exerted upon us, are probably more true for the farmer than anybody else in our society. Here's somebody whose grandfather and father had a farm in this state. And he likes to farm. He wants to farm. He can farm. That's his choice. He can do it economically. And he can raise good food, and he can make a living at it. And he's not farming. Now, why isn't he farming? These things don't just happen. We make the laws, that make this happen. The tax laws, the zoning laws, the rest of it. And some big conglomerate corporation comes in, buys up his farm, chops down the trees, starts turning Iowa into a dust bowl if they don't sell it out to the coal strip miners. And all those families go. And when those families go, those little towns go because they're dependent on those farms. Now, if you think I can't go out and talk sense to the Iowa farmers and get them to respond to that, I think they feel as deeply about this as anybody. Who controls their prices? Who controls the price of corn? Anybody in Iowa? Not on your life. We all sit here in Iowa and we're dependent upon what the Chicago Board of Trade, the Department of Agriculture, and some financiers in Wall Street decide they're going to do with all the things that affect what happens to us here. They toss our little economy around like it was on the end of a fly line, at their whim, almost as a matter of sport. I think farmers understand that. I think that's what's troubling them. And you see what's happening in the country. You've got some people that are trying to divide the country. It's a very effective political device. I don't have things a very moral way to go about it, but it's a very effective political device. And you get young people to hate old people, and whites to be suspicious of blacks, and long hairs to worry about short hairs, and the blue-collar worker to get all uptight about the guy on the minimum wage or who's on welfare, get them squabbling with each other. And all these people get their eye on who they think the enemy is, and they lose track of who's walking off with it all. And what they're beginning to find out is that the real difference in this country is between those people who are earning $100,000 a year or more and everybody else. That's the division. Now, I don't know whether people are going to understand that in 1972, but more and more are coming to understand it. And as soon as they do, watch out, because then you are going to have a political movement, not just in Iowa, but all across this country. But what I'm saying is the kinds of things I've talked to you about this evening, I can talk about in a union hall or at a meeting of Iowa farmers. And they're all feeling the same pressures. We talk about them in different ways, that's all. And we look a little bit different. We use a little different kind of vocabulary. But we're all subject to the same pressures in this society. We're all, in the cities, they're all breathing the same polluted air. Out here, the same corporations that are buying up the land are the corporations that are filling your heads full of garbage with television at night. It's all part of a thing, don't you understand? And I think people are beginning to get onto that.